Okay guys, I'm excited. I can finally give a comprehensive review of the KTM 1290 Super Adventure R. It's been 2.5 years since I got the bike. This is a 2022 model. I got it in 2023 with 0 kilometers on it. We've gotten to the 10,000 kilometer mark. 8,000 of those kilometers has been on the dirt. And when I say dirt, I don't just mean, you know, sort of rolling, smooth dirt through the countryside. A lot of those kilometers were on really, really rough terrain. A journey across a land too vast for highways and too real for postcards. Welcome to RideMex, a Trans-Mexico trail like no other. 20,000 kilometers, 21 Mexican states, one continuous backcountry route. A loop from the United States to the Guatemalan border and back, built from dirt roads, remote villages, volcanoes, jungles, canyons, coastlines, and a history that runs deeper than pavement ever could. Wow. Most of you probably know that the R version is the off-road version, the S version is the street version. This is the R version. What really distinguishes it is it has 21-inch front wheels and 18-inch rear wheels. The first thing I want to talk about is comfort. Is this motorcycle comfortable? I find it to be quite comfortable. When you stand up on the bike, the position's really perfect. I made no adjustments to it other than a slight handlebar adjustment. I don't remember if I moved it forward or backward, but I can ride on this all day long, and you can really move forward and back on the seat relatively easily. The tank is large, but it's not exceedingly large. Like, I can really get up on the front of it when I need to, and I like that. You can see the knee bend. It's not a 90-degree angle or above, so I find it quite comfortable when you're sitting down. And overall, I'm pleased with the ergonomics of this motorcycle. How does this bike fare in terms of reliability? That was my main concern when I got the motorcycle. I knew I would be going out into the wilds of Mexico for months. And in the wilds of Mexico, you are a long ways from a KTM dealership or any supplier that can provide you with parts for a KTM. And you hear certain issues about KTMs and wonder, how likely is it that I'm going to be that person that's going to be out there in the wilderness, far, far away from civilization, and then suddenly have a bike that doesn't work? Well, unfortunately, I did have an issue with it. My wife and I were in the Tehuacan-Cuicatlan Biosphere Reserve in Puebla, which is central Mexico, and we were almost crossing the border into Oaxaca. We were quite a ways from any big city. We had packed up camp, got all of our gear on. I went to start the bike, and there was nothing. The battery was fine. It turned out that the starter switch had failed. KTM told me in Mexico it would be 8 weeks before I could get another one. And I could get one in the United States shipped to a US address in about 3 days, maybe 4 days, 5 days, but it would have taken another 2 weeks to get it to my location in Mexico. And it just wasn't something that was worthwhile doing, waiting all that time. So I ended up making or designing on paper a steel rack for the back of our support vehicle, going to a metal worker, making a rack that could support this bike. Have some video of that.
Tenemos que inclinarlo hacia allá para que pase por allá. Vamos a inclinar hacia mí. Ahí pasa acá.
And remember, guys, don't mistreat animals. A bunch of us were on the back of the rack after we installed it on the vehicle, jumping up and down to make sure that, you know, wasn't going to lose $25,000 falling off onto the highway on our way back. And it worked. We got the bike home, and then I picked up the KTM 500, which is really at the opposite end of the spectrum for adventure riding. And in the end, with everything bad that happens, something good happens, and I would not have taken the 500 out at that time to ride another 2 months on the road if it hadn't been because this motorcycle broke down. Just as a caveat to that, my wife's DR650 also broke down. We ended up meeting a wonderful family and spending 4 days with them over Easter because everything was closed. Okay, there's Mr. Nobles. So he's got a few weeks of food. That makes me happy. At least you got that. You get a month of food. And then after that, you have to find out what you're gonna get it from. Huh? Go eat a sheep or something, but don't let anybody know. So we made new friends, had a cultural experience. And so your bike breaking down is not the end of the world. It's really an opportunity to do other things. Nevertheless, we all want a motorcycle that doesn't break down, right? And this one did. When I put the switch back on, I then realized that the menu switch had also gone out. And so I ended up replacing both of the switches. But this time, the switches just fit together, but there's nothing that really seals them. There's no real seal between the two of them. So I put silicone on the inside, silicone on the outside, and tape, just in case. And that should protect dust and water from getting into those switches. Now, I don't think that the switch just stopped working. When we got to San Juan Raya in the Tehuacan Cuicatlan Biosphere Reserve in the middle of the desert, it hadn't rained for 18 months. And that day, right after we got there, it rained really, really hard. It rained so much, we brought in a flood. This is completely dry. Completely dry. And look at that. Wow. That's amazing. I've heard of desert flash floods. Well, that's what that is. I suddenly heard this rumbling. I thought, is that the truck coming? But no, check that out. Woo-hoo. And the townspeople were all thrilled. They all came out to watch the rain. It was pretty exciting to see how the town reacted to this, you know, sudden and unexpected rainstorm. I had the bike sitting at the edge of this building that we'd set the tents up underneath, this awning. And I think it's quite likely that the switches were in a torrent of water coming off the roof. I did think of that later. That might have been one of the reasons. So maybe it was just too much water for the switch. But that's what happened. Have there been any other problems with the bike mechanically? Yes, there have. Oh, I shouldn't say mechanically, but there have been bolts that have come loose. The kickstand bolt, the main bolt to this kickstand, kept coming out. And I put blue Loctite on it, put it back in, still kept coming out. So then I put red Loctite on it, and it still kept coming out. it was getting quite annoying as you're traveling and dealing with filming and just being on the road and all the work you have to do on the road. And I kept having to tighten up the kickstand. Well, I finally replaced the aluminum bolt from the factory with a steel bolt, and then it never came loose again. It's been over a year now and it has been tight. So I realized that was the solution. Sometimes the aluminum bolts come loose, you can replace them with steel bolts, and that will solve the issue. Then I realized at some point that my rear brake pedal, rear brake lever, was moving sort of side to side, not just up and down. And I was, well, what's going on? And I realized that you have the frame here, and then the subframe, and this subframe is held on by 4 bolts. Well, 2 of the bolts had come out, 1 was loose, and 1 was still tight, which is not good. You know, more than half of the rear of the seat is sitting on that rear subframe. So again, I immediately just replaced those bolts with steel bolts, don't have to deal with it anymore, and they've been tight ever since. Those are the only issues I've had with the bike in 2.5 years, riding it through really rough terrain. I must repeat that because this bike has not seen highway miles. I'm actually proud to say that this bike has seen so little highway that I've only used the cruise control on 2 different days, the most recent day being 2 days ago. So this bike has literally gotten a major workout in the backcountry, and that has been the issues with it. So comfort is amazing. Reliability, we'll find out over the coming months because I will be using it a lot over the next 6 months, at least doubling the kilometers that are on it now. And a lot of that will be through really rough terrain. So I'll give another update later. The third thing I want to talk about was its performance. And this bike has amazing performance. The KTM engineers went all out in making an absolute monster of a machine when it comes to its suspension and the engine. KTM says it has 160 horsepower. People that have checked it, I think on the dyno, I think they say it's 143. Whatever that number may be, it's more than significant because you will, unless you're in that top 1% of riders, you will never need all the horsepower, be able to use the horsepower that this beast has. I call it fury because it's just so furious. The suspension really gobbles up everything that you'll come across, even big rocks, big ditches, with soft, like I have overloaded this machine a few times. The rear spring is really not made for my 200 pounds plus 15, 20 pounds of gear that I wear, plus, 50 or 60 pounds of gear in my soft bags on the back. I should have a stiffer spring, but even not changing out the spring, it's handled really, really well in those terrains. So overall, I am completely impressed with the performance of it. So the question would be, how does this bike compare to other ADV bikes? By far, I would say that it is the best bike in its category, in this weight class with this large of an engine. If we look at some of the other bikes here, I'd like to show you the other bikes that I've been riding, because the only way you can know how good this bike is if you've been riding a lot of the other top bikes that are in this category or close to this category. So I really went all out, and to give you a little bit of history on my past, I started off on the DR650, which is a great little bike for what it is. And what I mean for what it is at its price point, it's easy to fix, it's relatively light. So this was a great first bike for me to do ADV riding. I started off doing half the Trans-America Trail, and it just really, really fit me. The trail, I mean, the Trans-America Trail really fit me. After I did the Trans-America Trail, I thought, really, I live in Mexico, and I'd been in Mexico at that point for about 14 years, and I thought, Mexico needs a Trans-America Trail, it needs a Trans-Mexico Trail. And I really wanted to create that trail, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Mexico is not very well understood by most people, but it's about 77% mountains, and it has peaks that go up to 12,000 feet all the time, all throughout the country. So the topography is extremely rough. And I realized that I either one, didn't have the time, or two, didn't have the money. So years went by before I started on this project about 3 years ago. And that's what I was using this motorcycle for, was for creating the Ride Mex Trans-Mexico Trail. But it all started on the good old DR650 on the Transamerica Trail. I got the Desert X Rally, the standard Desert X, which are both fabulous bikes. They really, really are good bikes. I really enjoy riding them. I think they're really well made. Also, in terms of how many kilometers, this one I put tens of thousands of kilometers on. This one I put just over 3,000 kilometers on, almost entirely on dirt. And this one has 14,000 kilometers, but I did do a bit of highway travel on it because I went up to the United States to visit my father. But I still have put on about 3,000 kilometers in the dirt on this as well. The BMW 1250 is of course very famous in the ADV world. I think it was the R80, something like the R80. BMW created one of the first adventure bikes, and it all sort of started there. Then the KTM 500 and the KTM 890. So I go out and I train 3 days a week, about 2 hours, maybe more, but a minimum of 2 hours a day, 3 days a week. And when I say train, I mean train, not ride. And I alternate the different bikes, try to become a better rider, and become very familiar with these motorcycles. So it's been between 1 year and 2 years since I've gotten all these bikes, or 2.5 years. So I now feel that I've gotten enough experience with this bike and the other bikes to make a valid comparison between them and to be able to judge just how good or bad of a bike this is. Now, a lot of these other bikes, like the KTM 500, the 890, the Rally, they might be faster in the dirt if I really had to time myself. Obviously the 500 is a lot faster because it's so light. But when it comes to just pure fun, because when you're ADV riding, you're not racing, you're out there to have fun. And I find that this machine is just so preposterous with all of the power that it has and the wonderful suspension. It's just such a wonderfully ridiculous machine that I consistently, when I just choose a bike, just because I want to, like I'm just going to pick a bike that I want to go out on and have fun, I consistently choose this bike because, again, it's just so preposterous. Like, who would make a bike for the dirt that's a twin cylinder 140 to 160 horsepower engine? I think only KTM, which is wonderful. So I thank KTM for that. So this is obviously sort of my choice in the garage out of all the bikes. Having said that, I do not want to underestimate how good the Ducatis are. The Ducatis are absolutely wonderful. BMW has a great bike with the 1250 and now I think it's the 1350, 1390, 1350. But it's a little bit more on-road oriented, has smaller sized rims and more wind protection, which this one, I didn't talk anything about the highway riding. It obviously has plenty of power for the highway and is very comfortable. Cruise control works quite well, but the windscreen is not quite enough for highway riding. So you could just add a riser onto it, which I haven't done because I'm almost never on the highway. But obviously BMW has a lot of wind protection, more highway oriented. And then the other bikes, like the 500 is a wonderful adventure bike, but you have to add on all of these things to it. So, it comes from the factory as basically a sort of enduro bike. So you need to add on a bigger tank. I added on the Roughest tank. You need a more comfortable seat, not that little narrow one that it comes with. Seat Concepts has a great seat that they put on this bike that you can buy for this bike. Then the Rally Tower provides good wind protection, and you can mount your GPS here. But you have to make quite a few modifications, which involves a good bit of money and a good bit of time to get that bike. Also the gearing. The gearing is quite low, so you really need to change out the sprockets so that you can go a little bit faster on the highway. But even with those modifications, you still feel a lot of vibration. It's not comfortable for riding on pavement for longer periods of time. The 890 is of course quite amazing because it comes from the factory with relatively decent handguards. These things are pretty solid. And it doesn't need crash bars because of the fuel tanks and the way the protection has been built into the bike for these fuel tanks. So that bike comes pretty much ready to ride from the factory. But having said that, the Super Adventure also comes ready to ride from the factory with crash bars down here. And all I had to do was add on handguards. So I added some Roughest handguards and we're ready to go. So yeah, it's a wonderful bike. And I was happy to be able to do this review. I will be reviewing the other bikes too as time goes along. Get a little bit more time on the bikes, a bit of a feel for them, and taking them on longer trips. When you take them on these really long trips through really rough country, that's when you really get to know how good the bike is. A lot of bikes are great when you're close to home because if anything goes wrong, you know, help's right around the corner. But it's when you get out there in the wilderness and these really, really rough places and you just use it day after day after day. It starts up every morning and goes, and then you know it's a good bike. So within the next 6 months, I'll be putting on another at least 10,000 kilometers on this bike, mostly in dirt and really rough terrain. So we'll see if the switch issue was the only one or if other issues come up. If you like the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe and give the video a like. It really helps us. The channel is really just starting. I've published some videos over the past few years, but not really consistently. Now I'll be updating the channel a lot, publishing a lot more videos. I'm going to try to publish one a week. So I really appreciate your subscription. I really love ADV riding. I really love these bikes. I think all of the manufacturers are actually wonderful. This is difficult technology to create. A lot of people don't appreciate it. Like even the good old DR650, as old as this technology is, it is still wonderful. It's really, really good technology when you compare it to a lot of other bikes you can find in the world that are a lot less robust. There are a lot of sort of brand name bikes out there that are just, you know, of course I understand every market's a little different. Not everybody can spend the money, but these machines are just really robust, well made, and I'm really, really impressed. So have a good day, and thanks for following along.